Owen's here for once. He's actually got some good news. A strong finish by the Nikkei after some big dollar moves by World Central Bank. Makes a change, Owen?
Well, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but they are only reversing some of those losses we saw earlier this week, Stuart. But this might well be, with the way things are going in the Eurozone right now, the only big bazooka moment you see, certainly before the end of the year. This was central banks around the world getting together with an unexpected announcement to ease credit facilities for interbank lending. The markets loved those noises. As you can see there, these are the numbers on the Asian markets. The Nikkei ending the day nearly 2% up. The Hang Seng still trading, easing back a little bit with some of those gains, but nevertheless, still a very strong trading session in Hong Kong, up around 5%. The rest of the markets there as well, basking a little bit in that glow from those world central banks.
Well, the big gains did eclipse some worrying data, though, from China. I'm being pessimistic now. The latest manufacturing figures show factories have been turning at their slowest rate for nearly 3 years. It confirms, of course, the global slowdown as demand for Chinese goods slips in Western countries, but it also puts the government in more of a quandary over just how much control it should exercise over the economy. Duncan Hewitt has more.
OECD has just reduced its prediction of growth in China for next year down to 8.5% from 9.3% this year. So clearly still way higher. But there are clear worries in China at the moment. We've seen the central bank saying that the contribution of net exports to GDP reached 0 in the last quarter. Orders were significantly down at the Guangzhou Trade Fair recently. And the central bank, which has been mainly focused on fighting inflation, has also in China just yesterday taken steps to increase liquidity, has reduced the reserve rates for banks. And there's a sense that they need to boost, in particular, small businesses, which have been struggling to get credit. We've seen a lot of defaults and bankruptcies. But some economists still want more steps, and they're calling for cuts in both income tax and VAT on businesses so that spending will be stimulated.
Well, ordinarily, those kind of numbers that Duncan Hewitt was talking about there from China might have rocked the markets on any other day, but they were given a mighty shot in the arm, courtesy of central banks like the US Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank. They got together to make credit facilities for interbank lending just that little bit easier. The aim to stave off a new global credit crunch. Catherine Nicholson has more details.
It's a rare moment of relief for traders the world over. Wednesday's surprise central bank deal spurred France's CAC 40 index to close up over 4%. Frankfurt's DAX put on more than 5%. And the effect was transatlantic. In New York, the Dow Jones closed more than 480 points up. The shot in the arm came from 6 central banks, among them the European Central Bank and the US Federal Reserve. They've come up with no less than a plan to shore up the global financial system.
What's really left its mark was this announcement of concerted action. That was a very important factor. The world central banks have reacted so as to help the banks and the banking system, and it's true that this is largely what's behind today's impressive market reaction.
To keep the economy running, states have to buy currency, for example dollars, to buy petrol. Until now, individual banks in Europe had to buy from individual American banks. But recently, things have been freezing up, as banks lost confidence in each other. And this scenario leads to a credit crunch.
With a credit crunch, banks lend to each other at extremely high rates, to the point that it's no longer viable. That's to say the taps get shut off, and then after that, well, the money stops flowing.
And that is catastrophic for any economy. Thanks to the New Deal, the European Central Bank will trade currency on behalf of individual banks at a much lower rate of interest. This coordinated action will certainly help to grease the world's financial wheels, but it doesn't solve underlying debt problems. Those are down to the politicians to work out.
So we saw Messrs Sarkozy and Merkel at the end of that report, and that's a reminder that both of those leaders, and indeed the Eurozone leaders, are far from finding any kind of meaningful solution to this current debt crisis, and the pressure doesn't let up. There are 2 key bond sales later this Thursday. Spain and France, between them, are auctioning off around €8 billion in new government debt. We've seen the borrowing costs, of course, for both of these countries rising to spectacular levels. Spain, for example, you can see there the yield, the interest rates rates on 10-year government bonds, up now near 7%. They have receded in the past couple of days or so, and it's worth noting that the IMF was very explicit yesterday in saying that neither Spain nor Italy were in any kind of bailout talks with the IMF for some financial help. But perhaps more interesting right now is France as well, also auctioning off a range of paper this Thursday morning. France has fulfilled its borrowing needs for this year, but is nevertheless pressing ahead with this bond sale. Remember, there's lots of pressure on the French right now to keep their AAA rating, and yet their bond yields are also on the up, trading at around 3.5% currently. That's way over the German benchmark of 2%. So you begin to see the picture there, a big difference between France and Germany on their borrowing costs.
OK, we're going to pick up on a few more of the day's business stories now. And France has suffered a fresh blow in its attempt to find a foreign buyer for its flagship fighter jet, the Rafale. The Swiss government has announced it's opted for a €3 billion deal to buy 22 of Saab's Gripen jets instead of Dassault's Rafale. It's another setback for Rafale just weeks after the United Arab Emirates went cold on another deal for the plane, claiming it was too expensive compared to other tenders.
And Starbucks is to open, 300 new branches in the UK. The coffeehouse chain is concentrating most of the expansion on around 200 licensed drive-through outlets, with the creation of up to 5,000 new jobs. In recent years, the US-based multinational has closed nearly 1,000 stores worldwide to save $500 million.
Now, he sank Olympus with his whistle-blowing revelations, but Michael Woodford is lining up a takeover bid of the Japanese camera giant. The former chief executive, who was sacked for exposing a huge accounting fraud, has resigned from the board, and he's ready for a spectacular comeback. He's Shirley Sitbon.
This changed its tradition when it hired a non-Japanese Michael Woodford as CEO. But it didn't think he'd trigger a revolution. As he took over the company, Woodford started examining the books and noticed strange transactions. The company had invested hundreds of millions in firms that were losing money. He quickly blew the whistle.
I just couldn't reconcile what could be worth $800 million for these three companies with no turnover. Never mind that they seem the most bizarre choices. I mean, face cream. I mean, come on.
Woodford discovered Olympus was using these investments to hide huge losses. He says he tried to discuss this within the company, but then the board fired him in October, and Woodford went public. He talked to Japanese and U.S. authorities, gave interviews to the press, said there may have been embezzlement. When Olympus' new president admitted the cover-up, the revelations had already hit company stocks. Their value dropped by half. Meanwhile, Woodford said he hoped to return to the top of the company.
You could be criticized for making a noise, for causing this disruption. I'm not harmonious. I don't work in that way. But that's what corporate Japan, I believe, needs. It needs people to challenge and to question and to act independently. And it'd be a sad tale, wouldn't it, if you do the right thing and you're not wanted back.
I'm not obsessed about returning back.
Woodford says he wants to protect Olympus, where he had worked for 30 years. While some foreign investors want to see him come back, they haven't yet persuaded enough of the shareholders to join them.
And finally, it's a Warren Buffett story for you, where it may be saving the media industry one newspaper at a time.
Well worth holding the front page for, I would say, Stuart, and one of the world's, perhaps the world's most famous investor decides to buy not just any newspaper, but his hometown newspaper. This is Warren Buffett, who is reportedly offered $200 million to buy the Omaha World Herald in his native city, where it all began for him. He thinks that local newspapers, far from dying, are worth a punt, and if Warren Buffett says so, then you can be sure that other investors will be listening. He's also bought around 6 other dailies in Nebraska and Iowa. He's currently a Washington Post board member and says he wouldn't have done this deal if he thought that newspapers, or local newspapers particularly, were on their way out.
Excellent. You bought up the Birmingham Herald yet?
That'll be my next move, yeah. The Worcester Evening News was my first paper. The Worcester Evening News. The Worthing Gazette was me. There you go.
All right, Owen, thank you very much. More news coming up with Claire really shortly here on France 24.
This is Kim, about to feel one of his favorite sensations. At Shell, we are developing more efficient fuels that can help us to get the most from our energy resources. Let's use energy more efficiently. Let's go.